The Economic Offences Wing of Mumbai Police arrested a senior accounts executive from New India Cooperative Bank on Saturday for allegedly siphoning off 122 crore rupees in cash from bank's Prabhadevi and Goregaon branches. 57-year-old Hitesh Mehta reportedly confessed to taking money from banks' safes, and since the pandemic, he said he had been continuing to do so. The fraud was uncovered during an audit by the Reserve Bank of India on Wednesday. Now, this comes 2 days after the RBI imposed a 6-month transaction ban on the bank due to irregularities in its lending. Now, following this, the RBI superseded the bank's board for 12 months now, leaving customers scrambling to recover their savings. The development raises one question, and that is, how safe are India's cooperative banks? Let's talk about that. Dr. Srinath Sridharan joining us live. He's a policy researcher, corporate advisor. Srinath, thank you very much for taking time out. This is, an issue that really hurts the people of this country a lot more than it really hurts the regulator at large, and which is when it comes to light that banks such as the India Cooperative Banks or any other cooperative bank for that matter is scrambled and is a part of a larger conspiracy to siphon off money. It's people's money. It is their hard-earned savings, and they don't really know what's going on. Where is the fault? Where does the regulator fail to really supervise these banks?
Good morning, Shweta. I think I have a slightly different take. Here, I think thanks to the regulatory regime tightening over the last few years, some of these frauds are being unearthed. The real challenge in some of these grassroots level banks, as I would call the cooperative banks, because they're very, very localized, and they work with a certain set of cohorts of customers who are in the local geography or certain, let's say, communities. They come together. The reality is a lot of these banks are very, very scattered. So most of these banks have political influence. You have politically connected individuals controlling and running some of these banks. The challenge is, how do we move away from the political control to RBI control? I think that's something that would going to need a lot more political will. It's not just about RBI. RBI, if you remember in 2020, the Banking Act Amendment kind of gave its power, and which is why this entire scam has been unearthed. The second point and the largest challenge with us, despite all that we might speak about supervision or using technology to find out what's going wrong, the human ingenuity and humans are the cause of most of these problems. If you look at the history of financial services globally, go back to 500 years, almost 99% of all large scandals have human greed wanting to cheat the others. You just need one, let's say, slightly smarter guy beating the system, and the system collapses. So I think here the challenge is going to be, how do we bring more and more cooperative banks under RBI control, and how do we take away, because some of the classifications or categories of cooperative bank licenses actually have dual regulatory reporting. While the RBI would look at some of these, it is the registrar of cooperative societies in that particular state or the city which is also looking at some of the administrative aspects. Okay. If we can crash them and bring them into one single fold called RBI, I think we have a better chance of supervision.
All right. If one were to look at it, Srinath, given that there is a dual regulatory oversight, both from the state government and RBI, the basic assumption therefore goes is that it makes it all the more regulated for that matter. So where is the real challenge in regulating cooperative banks?
So while theoretically it sounds like that, Shweta, it is not so. Why is it that most of the cooperative banks across India, especially in, let's say, Tier 2, Tier 3 India, have a chairman of the board who is a locally politically exposed or politically influential, or a politician himself as the chairman of the bank? That's a very, very large governance flaw. Some of these banks do loan mailers just before the run-up of elections, which is seen across the country as well. So we have a challenge that the states may not necessarily cooperate or take financial governance far more seriously than what RBI would. I think that is where the challenge is in terms of how do you control the narrative. So states do not necessarily understand the financial prudence and the risks around what RBI wants to control.
Okay. All right, and I want to talk about customers for a minute here, because it's the customers who are actually left scrambling without their money, without their life savings. And a lot of customers, at least locally, rely on these cooperative banks. These are grassroots banks, as you rightly pointed out. So therefore, these are the go-to banks for a lot of people who reside in rural areas, for that matter. And when it comes to regulatory clampdown, a part of their money they can never really recover. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the only money that perhaps they can recover is to the tune of about 5 lakh rupees. Earlier it was 2 lakh rupees. That limit was further upped till 5 lakh rupees. So despite whatever savings they may have in these banks, that's the only money they can get back in case there is a regulatory supervision on the bank.
Yes, Shweta, you're right. The deposit insurance scheme of the RBI enforces all the banks to cover fixed deposits or all kinds of deposits up to 5 lakh rupees and interest as well. So that is one saving grace. And if you look at most of the cooperative bank challenges, we've seen the last at least the 7-8 years, we've seen at least 10-12 banks going through such tough measures. I think in that narrative, nearly 98% of all customers get their full money back. It's just that when they clamp down saying that you cannot withdraw the money, it is not you're losing the money. They're just getting some time. If you notice, even in this case, they've brought in an administrator and a team of advisors who are experts in different fields to come and figure out where is the mess and what is the problem. So until then, so I assume that it's going to take under 7 to 10 days before they will release some of these monies out. It's just to assess what has really gone wrong and the depth of the problem. So the money is up to 5 lakhs is safe, but over and above that will depend on what is the nature of the actual fraud, and is that money recoverable, and is it going to be impairing the viability of the bank itself. Typically in such cases, the RBI then figures out a scheme of amalgamation or merger to merge this bank to some other bank and let it go as a going concern. Very rarely has a RBI ever left a bank hanging and shut shop. So that's a comfort zone, and I think it is the ethos of RBI to say that customer comes first. So while there will be delay and the pain, the money is not lost. I think we have seen liquidations of financial services businesses where the creditors take haircut and the depositors are taking haircut. And I think those are the lessons RBI has brought to some of these tougher stands they take.
All right, and I also want to talk specifically on this fraud. And when we look at how the money went missing from the coffers of at least 2 branches of this bank, I think it also brings to light a larger collusion among employees, in this case a general manager, that perhaps remains underreported, Srinath.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Shweta. I mean, let's look at in a cooperative bank, a general manager is as good as probably, let's say, a COO of sorts. The great general manager is a misnomer and it's misleading as well. A very, very senior person that there are people to look up to. And there are lots of those risk flags that get taken, right? If you're going to actually carry cash out of your locker, it's going to be in a bag, in a box, in a trunk, in something. And there must be cameras in the branch. There must be records that you are actually saying that I'm taking out this cash. It's not as if you're putting in a couple of crores in a haversack and moving out. So how did it miss the red flag? So these are the questions that there must be collusion. It's not as if one person has just taken it and simply vanished, right? So that's something that will have to come into the picture. 2, the internal audits and counting of cash or deposits and all that, how did it not tally? If they're saying that this has been happening since COVID, we are actually talking about nearly 4 years has gone by.
Right.
Until the RBI inspection, they missed it. So there is a level of, I think, granularity of seriousness that we'll have to see. The staff, the internal audit, the external audit, and the management reports, where have they missed? And knowing the RBI, I think this is the granular details they will get into now and use this as a lesson for bringing in tighter regulations for the other cooperative banks.
All right, and before I let you go, I think this overlapping of jurisdiction on regulation on who is to regulate cooperative banks is often leaving, the customers scrambling. And in this case, cooperative banks coming increasingly under RBI radar, only to realize that there's some sort of fraud with depositors' money at large. Now, before I let you go, Srinath, I think it's also important, if I have to ask you, what exactly should regulator do at this point in time to really strengthen the regulatory mechanism to ensure, many of these banks are brought within the purview and many of these frauds are detected early?
See, I think there's a lesson here from the political economy perspective, Shweta. I think the message is just like we have the Finance Commission or the GST Council. If the central government and the state governments can collaborate and work with RBI, I think they will understand that for short-term political gains, don't use banks for populism. Use banks to strengthen grassroots level consumer confidence. And I think it is going to need a lot more political will than just expecting RBI to pull up the socks. RBI is already acting on these, but they will need more political cooperation. And I think that's what is missing.
All right, RBI would need more political cooperation in case of cooperative banks specifically. Are you hoping that they should fall completely within the purview of RBI? Do you think that is something we could see going forward?
Yeah, I think every time a scam happens, everybody reacts, everybody screams from top of their lung. But give it under 1 month, it'll die a slow death. And that's sadly the case. We are not shown so much of seriousness. If you look at the executive, which is the RBI, shows seriousness, but the political nature of some of this, in the large scheme of the Indian banking system, with no disrespect to the customers and their sentiments here, a loss of 150 or 200 crores seems like almost insignificant. And I think that's the fear that I have, that politicians look at, saying it's really nothing, just move on.
All right. Well, Srinath, thank you very much for taking time out. Thank you for joining us on that story.